Hello. Welcome back to another showcase of Ask the Doctor with Dr. Jeffrey Sherman. Today is Thursday, May 28th, and the CDC reports 1.6 million cases and over 100,000 deaths caused by COVID-19. Today, we're going to discuss the impact that COVID has had on professional sports. How can we bring back the game safely? The NBA took leadership and action for the health of its players and fans before many state and local governments had taken action. They suspended the NBA season on Wednesday, March 11th. Joining us today in our discussion is my fellow newscaster from KBEV Studios, Jackson Harris. Welcome to the show, Jackson.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, this is great. Okay, so basically, we're going to discuss now about how do we bring sports back? Because I looked up some statistics before we started that was generally the revenue generated from professional sports. And for every NFL team, it said $286 million of revenue per NFL team. And that's just NFL. That's the biggest one. There's also $237 million for the MLB teams. The NBA teams are $152 million. NHL is $88 million. So that's a lot of, I couldn't find a GDP value, but I'm sure there's a lot of economic loss from professional sports being halted. And one of the things that people talk about often is the economy. So because the economy isn't just money, it's also supplies, it's food, it's everything. So I guess what are your thoughts on this matter as well? Baseline thoughts.
Well, I think so far a lot of people want to see the return of sports. A lot of people don't have much to do while
that's true.
A lot of states still have the stay-at-home orders. So I think everyone wants the return of sports. But the main question is how can we do it safely so that no one gets hurt in the process?
Exactly. And I about the thing about that's right. About keeping it safe is I heard how the NFL teams, they were quarantining their players extremely strictly, so that essentially how people who have families and are living with their families, they stick together. They don't quarantine themselves from separate rooms usually. So they're doing it like that with their teams. They're basically just treating all their team members as a family, and so they're making sure that everybody is safe, so that in theory they could play out on a field, and if none of them have been exposed to the virus, then they should be able to play the game normally. Of course, you can't have an audience, so you can't get ticket sales, which apparently accounts for 30% of the revenue. Now, one thing is that masks are great at blocking viral particles, but playing with them is a little difficult, I think. However, could there be other similar solutions to that? Like Sherman, do you think there's any other measures that players could take?
I don't think masks are going to be worn during any games. And thanks for having me again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The nature of these games is just goes against social distancing. Primarily football, you're blocking in the offensive line and piling on top of each other. Basketball, you're sweating on each other. Hockey, you're bumping in and sweating on each other. So you really can't social distance, and masks are just not gonna fly. Baseball's a little bit different. You're spread out over the field.
That's true. Baseball.
Umpires can wear masks during and coaches in the dugout and things, and players can kind of spread out maybe. But the nature of these things are not gonna. So you were saying the quarantine and the health precautions in between games are going to be very, very important, and just some of the rules around the clubhouse are going to be very, very important, because the rules are it's going to be you're pretty much exposed to your own teammates, and if you can kind of minimize the risk of them, you just got to play the game the way it is. Wearing masks off the field, of course, and wearing and practicing safe distancing. But the game itself, is that's a little bit of a problem. But if you want the game the way it's going to be the real thing, you got to let it really happen.
That's right. And I like what you brought up about baseball, because I didn't even think about that. Baseball, I've actually done one season of baseball in my 8th grade. Yeah, a lot of playing baseball is actually just standing around. You're just waiting for the pitcher to get ready and then finally throw the ball, and then the batter might hit it. And then you do everything for like a minute, and then it's another waiting for a few minutes. That's why when you watch baseball, there's a whole lot of not baseball to entertain you. Yeah. And so I wonder if baseball is actually going to come back first because of the nature of the game, because everyone's so spread out. The closest contact you get is the catcher and the batter, and probably the people who are standing on the runners on bases, and then just people out in the field. I don't know the name for the ones who are on for those who cover bases. Right. Yeah, I think baseball would probably come first, although it's still risky because of the dugout and it's like so open. And of course, the audience.
The game, it makes sense that baseball. Maybe Jackson can speak to this a little bit too. I mean, there's more to bringing sports back than just safety's first and foremost, and the nature of the game makes it such that it makes sense that they can pull this off no problem in terms of safety. That is the game itself. Then there's the in between innings, or if they're spread out in the dugout and spread in the stands and no crowd in the stands. And then you were talking about money, and that's a whole nother thing. There's the virus part of this, and then the money part of this, and that's the bigger hiccup going on these days.
Right. And I know NASCAR recently held a race with no fans in attendance.
That's right.
They spoke a little bit on the revenue, saying that, yes, although there were no fans for ticket sales, the sponsors that a lot of the racers have and the sponsorship for the TV and network deals allowed them to still make money. But for baseball, there are some network deals and some sponsors, but I feel like the revenue would definitely take a little bit more of a dent if there were no fans in attendance.
That's right. Yeah, because I do know that baseball has been kind of on a downhill, I believe. Like, it hasn't been hip like how basketball has been made to be hip. And so it's up there. And then there's, because baseball is kind of like, baseball is an older sport, of course, and hasn't changed that much, I think. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
Yeah, so it loses the audience, the attendance, and when there's 80 home games a day, the day-to-day audience is not that great. But they will lose a certain portion of their revenue with the no fans in the stands. And for that reason, the owners want to work out a deal with the players before getting on the field on how to pay them, because their contracts were negotiated when the owners assumed they would have fans in the stands, parking, concessions, souvenirs, extra, $10 million a game at home or more. Now that there's no fans, they're thinking, well, the money we're going to give you has to be adjusted. But majority of the money is TV money, as Jackson mentioned.
Right.
And the TV networks pay a lot of money to the sports to televise them. But if there's no games, there's no TV, so there's no money. And so they got to get on the field for that reason. And for baseball in particular, I guess for all sports, the bulk of the money comes for the playoffs. So you got to play a little bit of a season and then get to the playoffs, and that's where you can make up most of the money you would have made during the full regular, had a normal season been played. If you can get a postseason done with World Series and playoffs in October, then then you would be able to recoup the money you potentially lost by not playing half your season.
Yeah, that's good, because I actually looked this up as well. I found a statistic that said 60% of revenue is actually from the TV deals and from advertising and sponsorships and that stuff, which kind of shocked me. But at the same time, I realized that totally makes sense because of just how big the actual studios are.
That's a big TV show.
Exactly. In theory, one thing I did realize that could be a problem is because they want to quarantine their players so strictly. you could, in theory, get into a problem where I know that like false foul accusations happen. So I'm curious if there could be false coughing accusations. If like one player gets super heated at another player on the enemy team and there's no one else around, I'm thinking that they could, in theory, call them out for a cough, for a symptom of COVID, without anyone else around, and like could start people like to get in on that. And I think that could be an issue. Of course, we do have video footage, but like in the moment, people are going to freak out. And I don't really
Yeah, there's
know.
going to be some episodes. I mean, you've seen in baseball, they spit a lot. They're putting their hand to their mouth with the tobacco or sunflower seeds. So they could be calling people across the day. You've seen umpires and managers argue head right in each other's faces. There's going to be rules against that, and players are going to be tested a few times per week per player.
Yeah, definitely.
So as long as you stay negative, you can play. The second one player is positive, that one player, I believe, will be gone. The whole team doesn't have to start quarantining. They'll just keep testing everybody, and as long as everybody's negative, they can play. So you can go to the mouth, you can say he coughed, but the frequent testing is going to be such that player safety is always going to carry the day. And if you're negative in terms of a COVID test, you're going to be eligible to play that day.
Yes.
Right.
One artifact that I have here is a face shield that you just wear as a hat. Obviously, this thing can be like attached onto anything. And I'm curious if this would be a good alternative to masks, because like it could block viral particles, I believe. Like we talked about this many episodes ago, Sherman, how these things actually, to my surprise, do actually work. I always just assumed that the virus could get around it. But of course, they are a bit bulky, and I'm sure they provide like air resistance to running. I don't know how big of a factor that is, because it's not like the Olympics where timing is really important. But at the same time, any downsides people aren't going to like.
Yeah, that may be a little bit bulky to wear in a real game. They could try it during some kind of exhibition things. Baseball players or any athlete, it's hard for them to change their ways. Even during normal times to wear protective things, it takes they wanted to have pitchers wear a bulky cap so they wouldn't get beamed in the head, but none of them wanted to do it. Maybe you remember that. You've seen players wear that face mask thing. That's the one thing that I think caught on. But that shield, maybe some of the coaching staff and managers would wear that, but the players in the game, I have a hard time thinking they'd grab onto something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and along with the players, they also have to test the staff for the arenas and staff for the league and organizations. So that could also have a little bit of an effect on how the return happens.
Yeah, that's a good point. You have to test basically everybody along the chain of command. We actually have a good comment here, kind of related to that, how the television crews and the announcers and the support staff all have to be tested as well and quarantined for safety. We sometimes forget that there's people behind the camera. Everybody behind the camera also has to be tested, and that's one of the reasons Hollywood is suffering as well.
Yeah, more than just two teams there. You got media people, reporters. Now they're going to be spread out. The camera crews, announcers. There's going to be 1,000 people in the building or something. So it's still something. It's still a big undertaking for any sport. Whatever it may be. There's still going to be a lot of people there to deal with.
Right, and for NASCAR's races, they cut the amount of staff by half. So
they were able to do that.
Yeah, they were able to cut it down, and I think a lot of sports are going to be able to cut down on the staff.
Right.
But it's going to be a little difficult considering how much work needs to be done beforehand.
Exactly. And of course, some of that staff is for concessions. I think that's the right word. It's dealing with the food, dealing with the drinks, dealing with the tickets. Like there's part of that staff is for dealing with the audience. But if there's no audience there, then those people don't have a job, which that is one way to look at it, is that because of COVID, of course, because of basically every industry, but also in sports, is that people are also losing jobs because of because sports are not in session. And one other thing that's kind of interesting about the remote sport watching is how in 3 different categories, in golf, in NASCAR, and in the NFL draft, in all 3 of those, their viewership increased dramatically because they were remote. Because probably because more people were at home, they didn't have anything else to watch, or they weren't at work, so they could watch these instead. Or it was just because there's less audience people there in the flesh and more of them online, or not online, but on TV. And I'm very curious if, because of this pandemic situation, if some organizations are going to actually take a note of how things went now and might actually use it to their advantage. What if some sports actually kind of stop having audience stuff and instead focus even more on TV and live streaming?
Right. Well, this past Sunday, actually, there was a charity golf match.
Oh, okay.
Match 2. And it had Tiger Woods, Peyton Manning, Phil Mickelson, and Tom Brady. And that had an average of 8.5 million live viewers. So with that, they were able to raise $20 million for COVID-19 relief. So I think it goes to show that a lot more people are tuning into television now, considering that there's not a lot of sports on and people want to be entertained.
Yeah, there's
just a lack of sports out there. The NFL draft's a big deal anyway, so people were going to watch that if it was held, on the moon or whatever. But
yeah, they'd find a way.
Yeah, I mean, they're just starving for something, and that was like a live event, So you can only watch the, gold medal hockey game so many times. You've seen that 1,000 times.
Right.
So you want to see a live thing like the golf match that Jackson mentioned. That was a great event. They raised a lot of money. A lot of viewers watched it, and it was also entertaining because they mic'd up the players on the course, and the players could hear the announcers, and the players could speak and be heard. And so they're thinking, down the road in a real golf tournament, maybe we should mic up the golfers and use that as a normal thing now. I mean, these times are calling for some experimental things that will make sports maybe better down the road. And, who knows, next year at the Masters, they may mic up the players and you can say, so what are you thinking here, Tiger? Are you going to use a driver? How are you going to approach this hole? And he'll talk to you. And it'd be kind of a cool thing, all born from this concept of the charity match. That was a big success last weekend.
Right.
That sounds very interesting. Yeah, because that is one thing I thought about before, is how, because of this quarantining, people are kind of forced to use technology more. And so we're actually learning a lot more about technology and how beneficial it could be in instances where, players are mic'd up. And another thing is too, golf. Golf is also a sport that players are very separated from one another. It's not a team sport, simply. So I would think, I guess golf did happen. It was not shut down. I guess that's how spread out they're able to be. Now, I wonder if we develop COVID-19 treatments or preventative treatments that get powerful enough to where players can be next to each other. I'm wondering if that could be one way sports and just gatherings could be brought back.
The treatments are the key. I mean, we got to get this thing to where the flu is in terms of, incidence, treatment, and, fatality rate. If we can get it to where the common flu is, there you go. I mean, by definition, we're accepting the flu's risks every year with how we do business by going out and whatever. We don't want to get it, but we assume the risk of the flu by going out and going to restaurants and whatever. And then if we get the flu, there's a treatment, there's a Tamiflu, we get our flu shots. If there's a COVID version of the flu shot and a Tamiflu, and it can bring the fatality level back, and it can control this virus to where you're not going to be super sick if you do get it, then things will turn then that's when we're going to start to see some changes. Until then, we got to still mask up and be a little wary, because the virus doesn't behave like the flu right now. It's a little bit more severe than that, or more than a little bit. and it's tricky, and we don't have the treatments that we do for the flu, so it's not the same. But we got to get it to the flu, which we can do. It's just not an overnight situation. It's going to take some time. But if we can get it to where we assume the risk, and that the worst case scenario is the same statistics that the flu's been giving us for 5, 10, 15 years, then we'll be okay, because we've obviously lived with those statistics with them for a different virus.
And I think also having that stuff like treatment and stuff and medicine will also help with the fear that some of the players have. I know a couple players in the NBA, like Joe Ingles, a player on the Jazz. They don't exactly want to play right away. They're a little bit fearful about how their families will be affected, or how their teammates will be affected. So I think having treatment and stuff like that would definitely help give the players some reassurance in returning back to playing sports.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We don't know which players. There's going to be a handful that are just not up to playing, and that's fine. And if they're that's their call. And we don't know. Just because the sport is back on, and that's still a month away. But just because the sport is saying, okay, we're going to play, doesn't mean all the players are going to comply and play.
Exactly.
That is a very good point. And let's see, one thing that I thought about just now was how I'm certain that not all countries are going to recover from the coronavirus at the same rate, at the same time. Countries that are larger or got it later are probably going to take longer until they're corona-free. So I wondered, if one country were to become COVID-19 free, would that incentivize sports players in other countries to play in a country where there is no COVID-19 as a way to play without as many restrictions?
Perhaps, but the big money is here. And
that's true.
And here the COVID-19 is playing a big role. Is going to play a big role. Yeah, players can, if they will choose to play out, but I think the money is going to be the biggest determining factor for an individual person's choice. However, you bring up a good point about where COVID is more popular or more endemic than in other places. The National Hockey League has proposed a return plan, and maybe Jackson can elaborate on this, where they'll start 12 teams so 24 total teams, two centers, what they call hub cities of 12 teams each, and they'll continue the season with 12 in one city and 12 in another city. And these cities will be picked. They have to have the hockey facilities and the hotels, but mostly they're going to be picked because the COVID is not a big deal there. Edmonton, for example, or Denver, for example, may have less. So that's the driving force of that. So where the teams are going to be sort of sequestered is because the COVID is the least pandemic in that spot.
Right. And along with that, facilities are really important as well. As the NBA is starting to make its return, it's been in the talks with Walt Disney World about having facilities there, housing, practice facilities, and courts where games will be played as well. Because along with being in a certain city, there needs to be facilities that teams can use in order to create an equal amount of play.
Right.
That's fascinating. Walt Disney World, the theme park.
Right.
I mean, I guess the world is different than land, of course, but
apparently they have a mega sports complex down there. I myself have not been, but it has a lot of basketball facilities.
That's very fascinating.
They can hold an entire league in one spot, so no travel, no planes, and it just keeps the risk down. So they're looking at that as a solution. Yes,
there's the housing, there's the bathrooms, there's even restaurants, I'm certain, there for if they wanted to have food.
Right.
Yeah, big deal.
Wow. That's right. Yeah, theme parks are large. They have a large area to them. So converting stuff like that into sports dedicated zones, actually, that does work extremely well. one funny thing is that if Disney didn't Disney buy ABC? And I'm certain ABC also like does sports related things. I mean, every TV channel does. So I'm wondering if that actually helped them out in that regard at all. I mean,
yeah, it's all tied together. Disney, parent company of ABC and ESPN. ESPN, the big television partner for
of course, ESPN.
So the NBA is like, hey, look into their ESPN partner for a little help, and ESPN wants the NBA on. I'm sure they would make a killing with advertising and just want eyeballs on live sports. So everybody's trying to work together. Yeah, it's one big partnership, and it's no coincidence that Walt Disney World was part of this equation.
Right.
Remember, I guess one of the things that came up in my mind when I talked about that players can have treatments is, of course, I thought about zinc again.
Yeah.
How zinc kind of makes your lungs slippery and all that, so that you could prevent yourself from getting infected. And I don't really know where I was going with that, honestly. I was just bringing it up because it's funny.
Yeah.
Or not funny, but it's very useful information to know.
Sure.
That zinc can prevent a potential infection or make
athletes
infection.
Are going to have all the high-end supplements and resources available to them. I mean, it's it's not like what we would get, but hey, if it means bringing sports back, give them all the stuff to help to make it easiest, because we'll all watch. We all will.
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure everybody needs entertainment.
A lot of money involved as well in order to make all of this happen. So they're definitely going to get top of the line stuff in every aspect.
Yeah. The money is out there. It just
that's the answer to why they're coming back, is the money.
Right.
They're going to fight this virus so they can make their money, and they're going to find a way to make it.
Mm-hmm. That reminded me of the whole the vaccine race. Developing a vaccine is extremely important for the prevention of this entire pandemic. But of course, you can't help but know that all the different private companies that are developing vaccines are also thinking about, if I sell each vaccine for $10 and it's distributed to 5 billion people, that's $50 billion.
Right.
Which is you can't really blame them for thinking like that. It takes money, it takes time to make these vaccines, and it's stressful work. So it's not like selling it is completely immoral, because we do live in a society with. That's a different topic. We have a question actually from the chat. Does UV decontamination of equipment in locker rooms work? And I'm very curious about that. I did a little bit of research in UV. Does UV do anything? Do we know?
UV can slow the spread of virus. Not slow. It'll cut the ability for the virus to land on a specific surface.
Okay.
But the bottom line is in these locker rooms and surfaces in those kinds of places, they're going to have cleaning crews go in there, and that's going to be the thing that's going to prevent the virus from spreading, is disinfectants and just scrubbing it down with cleaning materials like you would do in your kitchen or on your doorknobs at home. They would just kind of keep doing everything like that in the locker rooms, and that's the most effective way. They'll do that several times a day, I would imagine. I mean, regardless of how many players have been in there at one time, whatever, they just kind of keep around the clock rubbing that place down. That's what it's going to have to be. But I don't think the UV in that spot is useful. I think you just got to keep scrubbing it, because you need something, boom, right away to get rid of it. Got to keep these players virus free.
And Dr. Sherman, if they were to use UV decontamination, how often would they have to use it in order for it to be?
Well, they would keep it kind of going all the time. They would just kind of have a low grade UV when, and you can't really, you need glasses, and you can't just exist in UV. So overnight, maybe they would put the lights on in the morning in between workouts. They put it on. So during the times of the locker room not being too populated is when they would have that, and then the crews would be in there cleaning, and then of course when the players are in there everything would be off, and then they restart the process. But it'd be more of a constant little. It just retards the growth of the virus, or it kills the time on. The virus doesn't replicate on surfaces. It just
Yeah, of course.
lasts for a certain amount of time.
Right.
So the life of the virus will be cut down. So you can kill it off a little bit better when cleaning facilities are not in use. So you kind of use it on the off hours. It can't hurt. Can't hurt.
No, it can't hurt. I mean, as long as it's not on players' skin all the time, because it's not crazy damaging, but it is, depending on which wavelength of UV, it could be equivalent to sunburning. You don't want that all the time.
Right.
Let's see. So, I actually a couple of years ago I did a brief science fair project about UVC light wavelengths, and I was testing it on dollar bills to see if that would be like a good treatment for it to prevent spread of infection. It doesn't really have to do with COVID, but that's why I was very interested with the UV decontamination.
Right.
And let's see, damn it, it just left me. Right. I remember hearing, or maybe seeing a couple years ago, how apparently since viruses like don't consume energy to exist, can they kind of just be bottled up and sort of last forever? Or is it like they eventually break down kind of thing?
No, they can be bottled up and frozen or maintained and in the right medium and the right environment. Yeah, that's how vaccines are developed. They just kind of keep them in these test tubes over time and try to, work them over the years. We may have talked in a prior program that the HIV doesn't have a vaccine yet, but they're keeping this virus in these test tubes, all trying to make that vaccine. It's been around for 30 some odd years, so they can that's how these things they develop in these labs, and then these viruses can get out. So you got to be careful and keep them in.
Yeah, you got to be very careful. We still have smallpox.
Not as perfect as the human body, though. I mean, this one really loves your lungs and loves your nose, and and it's a tough one. But with the right precautions, it can be controlled. We just got to make sure everybody does those precautions.
It looks like at the end of the day, it all comes down, in basically all fields of industry, it all comes down to the vaccine. It all comes down to the vaccine being developed and distributed so that everybody can return to everything that they were doing. That includes sports. Because, some team sports just have too much contact to really be extremely realistic and not stressful because you have to keep testing everybody. So, Jackson, do you have any closing thoughts on the sport matter with COVID-19?
Well, I think sports could definitely be returning soon. A lot of new things are being learned about the virus. There's a lot of steps being taken to try to have it return, and it's been proven that on television broadcasts have been doing fairly well, and
that's right.
Leagues have still been able to create revenue. So I think sports could be returning pretty soon.
Yes. Yeah, that's the big thing. We're already making progress, and the stuff that we're learning from forcing ourselves to use certain aspects of our technology to our benefit is going to have a profound impact on probably the rest of probably the next decade. I mean, and future, because just that's how technology works. Let's see. I think on that note, it's a good time to end off our episode about the impacts of COVID-19 on sports, what can be done about it, and remember, I dropped my phone. If anybody out there has any kind of symptoms for anything, not just COVID-19, don't be afraid to call a doctor about it, because regular infections and regular conditions don't sleep. They will still happen, and they will get worse if you don't talk to your doctor about it. So for example, I'm going to copy now Dr. Jeffrey Sherman's email in case you would like to set up an appointment with him, a private consultation. And if anybody out there, has questions for any kind of illness that they could have, feel free to ask him. Feel free to ask anybody that is a certified doctor. And Jackson and Dr. Jeffrey Sherman, thank you so much for being on the show today. It was an honor to have both of you guys here. It was especially great for Jackson to join us because I know very little about sports. So it's great to have a specialist.
Pulse of the sports world, and
Mhm.
listen to him. He seems to know his stuff.
Yes.
Thank you for having me on here. It was really fun.
Yeah, it was fun. And so for everyone out there, next week at Thursdays, 3 p.m. See you next time. Have a good week. Stay safe. Wear masks. And try not to use ibuprofen drugs.
Right.
We talked that in detail in previous episodes. And the short answer is they make your infection worse. See you all. See you next week. Stay safe.